Well, good morning, everybody. I have to start by telling you how absolutely pleased I am to be here. Part of my talk, I want to discuss a little bit about what my life was like here when my Dean of Agricultural Sciences was definitely not pro-fire, like we heard this morning, nor were many people in the DNR here in this state. I want to thank the steering committee for including me this year, and I have to apologize. Mr. Johnny Stowe and I should have had a conversation before this meeting, because much of what I include, or many things that I include in my 20-minute talk, you will see from his, but I don't have nearly as much time to go into it, so I kind of cut to the chase and get to where I have seen the fire community move in about the last 20 years or so. So what I want to do for you is quickly develop a framework for understanding our cultural perceptions of fire use through time using our friend Stephen Pyne's Pyric phase model, and quickly review the human-fire interactions across the eastern U.S. spanning the recent Anthropocene, something that Johnny did very well in his presentation. I'll do very quickly. And then approach the modern age of fire management in the East with a few milestones of the 20th century, and then provide some real solid advances that I've seen in the fire community over the last 25, 30 years of my career, and then end with some of our continuing cultural challenges as we move forward. So we've already heard the timeline, but our ancient ancestors witnessed wide-ranging fire on the plains or across burning brush piles, experiencing that wonderful heat output, and then observing all the fire effects on the landscape for at least the last 10 to 30,000 years, depending on which anthro journals you read. We look at the Neolithic fire. Our ancestors were able to capture fire and become fire masters, as Johnny outlined, from brush piles, burning stumps, burning thatch, and then they became capable of moving what we call cultured fire across the landscape to hunt with or to clear land, ultimately shaping the ecosystems that we inherited 200 to 250 years ago in the East. So hopefully many of you have seen this model. It's been published quite a bit and talked about and reviewed. And again, I have my Nataraja there on the left-hand side there, the god of fire and creation and death. But the Pyric model is basically the fire triangle, essentially, with a few modifications. At A, and then you look at B, C, D, E, and F is the cultural development of fire on the landscape over the last 2 million years. And B, we have the early prehistoric natural ignitions on the landscape. And then about 1.5 million years ago, we became fire stick farmers by capturing wildfires and moving it across the landscape. And then with further domestication of plants and animals, we became true fire farmers and using it for our agricultural outputs. Moving into the Industrial Revolution of the 1780s or so and up through the 1800s, we containerized fire, and now we have it in these controlled environments for energy or for industrial purposes. But then at E, at the upper right-hand portion of the slide, you see that we're still dealing with suppressing all wildfires and trying to get a little bit of prescribed fire onto the landscape. And I'll end with a similar slide at the end to see where we're headed. So what are some of those cultural benefits of fire? Real quickly, I'll jump through this because Johnny did such a great job of reviewing this for us. But some of the things I try to teach my students is our culture, as Johnny said. Pottery developed through the use of ovens and kilns. We understand now and appreciate the ritual use of fire becoming increasingly important across millennia in many cultures and many continents. We've benefited from improved agricultural outputs and the preparation of our fields through residue burning. Our animal husbandry improved through managed pasturage and rangelands with fire. Also, burning allowed for the resprouting of coppice species for structural or for basketry and other textiles by Native Americans and ourselves. As Johnny again said, depending on which source you look at, there's between 70 to about 125 different documented uses of fire by Native American tribes. Everything from removing rattlesnakes in northwestern Pennsylvania, encouraging berries, blueberries, and browse production, to encourage deer into hunting areas, reducing understory debris to aid movement and travel ways, or to collect acorns on the landscape, driving game for hunting, clearing and maintaining fields, encouraging all kinds of resprouting species, again, for cultural uses, denying forage to other groups as a form of warfare, and then really early stages of horticulture, of reducing our unwanted species from stands and girdling trees for felling. Many of us are familiar with the Northeast model, I call it, based on Omer Stewart and Gordon Day's work in the early 30s and 50s, where basically the wanton burning by Native Americans has largely been countered by Emily Russell's comments in the 1980s and her more conservative reading of those early primary sources. I would suggest that now we have much more of a reasoned acceptance that there were some heavy localized impacts by Native Americans along riverways, coastal settlements, with much uncharted territory in between, much similar to Lewis and Clark's comments when they were moving up the Missouri River. This was first identified by my Prometheus himself, Bill Patterson, who put the fire stick in my hand many years ago in 1988, and then again reviewed at this conference in 2005. I have an image there below. Brian Black, myself, and Mark Abrams published a paper in 2006 where we identified the relationship between oak hickory forests and Native American village sites and travelways throughout northwestern Pennsylvania. So again, these heavily localized impacts around village sites, resource collection areas, areas that we called catchment zones. There's been recent evidence that the post-contact Native American population decline led to the Little Ice Age across the northern hemisphere. The ice core data reported in 2010 revealed that the decrease in pyrogenic methane indicated a decrease in global burning rates from 1500 through 1700, eventually resulting again in the Little Ice Age. When you kill off 10 to 12, perhaps 15 million people in the Western Hemisphere, the succession that occurs on the landscape within a generation or two absolutely caused the cooling. This is a great paper. If you've not seen it, certainly check it out. So that's my little bit on the prehistoric stuff. We move more into the historic fire regime, and on the lower left-hand side you see an image produced by Brose and others in 2001 when he's trying to tell us to bring fire back onto the landscape, where prior to 1740 or so we had recurring low-intensity surface fires in the landscape. And then when Euro-Americans, again of largely Celtic origin, came to the eastern U.S., we increased the mean fire interval, or decreased the mean fire interval on the landscape, and fire went through the roof. Classic paper that I've studied and utilized, part of my dissertation, did the same thing here in Pennsylvania, looking at how early European settlement increased the number of fires on the landscape throughout the current river watershed of the Ozarks. And then again with this agricultural development of the late 1890s and the protection era, our fire suppression activities and protection era kicked off. Well, what was going on during that time period? We saw some pictures from Johnny, but between 1820 and 1920, the wonderful oak forests that we're managing today were essentially regenerated through heavy cutting to feed our growing nation's resource needs, frequent coppicing for the charcoal iron industry. In my dissertation, I think I found evidence for over 21 charcoal iron furnaces in Center County alone here in central Pennsylvania. Heavy grazing pressure resulted in much erosion across the coastal plain and areas that we are cutting and grazing. And then virtually every fire history paper that you look at nowadays identifies that the number of starts is largely driven by population density of whatever culture, whether it be Native Americans being pushed westward from eastward migration or European settlement in the 1840s and 50s. That led us into the 1890s with our protection era, where we changed from an agricultural fire more into an industrial, cultured or containerized fire. This grew from our need to protect our agricultural areas, farm buildings, outbuildings, crops, haystacks, all of those things, which really culminated in the 1903 Forest Fire Act of New York. Again, Smokey Bear campaign, we all like to pound on that poor bastard, but at least in my lifetime, it has gone from, all fires are bad, only you can prevent forest fires, to now on my fire apparatus, I have Smokey Bear's face with use fire wisely. At least we've moved in a step down the right road there. But, he turns 75 next month, so we ought to light a candle for him or something. All of this protection really led to the woody encroachment across our prairies, savannas, and glades, and led to the long-term impacts that we're now dealing with conferences such as this and all of the managers in this room, such as altered successional pathways, the big M word, mesification, soil and water acidification, increased fuel loading, fire risk across these urbanism. I love that term, Johnny. Thank you for that. But I want to move now more into the 20th century milestones and what's brought us here today. I think we should really accept the development of dendrochronology, historical ecology, and paleoecology. Those scientific fields that were developed through the 20th century, beginning with A.E. Douglas and moving on. All of those were reviewed by Guyette, Bill Patterson, and myself at the 2005 conference. So if you can get your hands on that, those reviews are pretty well done there and well received. Also, the recognition of disturbance ecology and the ubiquitous nature of disturbance on the landscape. It was no longer something aberrant to Clemensian succession, but now it's all part of our Gleasonian succession that we all accept generally, I think. We saw pictures of Herbert Stoddard burning for wildlife values in the southeast. I think we ought to tip our hat to the National Park Service. It's very early forays into prescribed burning in the large western ecosystems, where the very first prescribed burn at Sequoia National Park was less than 1 acre because they were worried about burning the whole thing up. But they were ahead of their time. And in my home state of Illinois now, although I'm a Pennsylvanian, very proud to say, where I live now in Illinois, we had the nature preserve system established in 1960 that allowed for the use of prescribed burning for natural areas management. Further 20th century milestones. The 1988 Yellowstone fires brought into the public forefront and the public policy debate arena of what should we be doing with these large western landscapes. Should we let it burn? Do we got to put every fire out? Really put it on the landscape. I was in the Army at the time and got mobilized to go fight fire from Fort Bragg. I think many of the people in this room recognize perhaps the 1992 paper in Bioscience, Fire and the Development of Oak Forest by Mark Abrams. His precursor, Craig Lorimer, in 1985, published a very similar paper that I think is often overlooked but should be read and taught. And then for me, as Ben said in the beginning, I got out of the Army in 1994, and I'm getting the 1993 Oak Regeneration General Technical Report from the meetings in Knoxville, Tennessee. That became my Bible. I'm now on my second copy of that thing, and it's so dog-eared and highlighted. It's just unbelievable. That is, for me, almost the Bible that set forth much of my career, and I would say maybe a third of the audience here as well, because it outlined our needed fire silvicultural research, outlined all of the different knowledge gaps that were evident in the 1990s. So I want to just throw in one or two of my weird little century milestones here in Penn State. Again, I got out of the Army in 1988-89. The Two Rock Run fire in Sproul State Forest burned about 9,600 acres in 12 hours. Large crown fire burned over entire landscape up there on the plateau. But obviously it regenerated oak across the landscape and reduced red maple and black birch to a large extent. I'd love to get back up there to see that place. Mark Abrams convinced me to stay for a PhD to work on old growth sites across Pennsylvania. And as I started getting collection permits from district foresters to go out and collect tree cores of these old areas, I was collecting pictures of fire-scarred white pine and chestnut oak, with big scars on the side, and I'd take them into the district office. And I was absolutely refused by several district foresters to collect a single fire scar data. 5 minutes left? You're kidding me. Holy hell. All right. All right. It would be remiss if I didn't point out the conference series that we're all part of right here. And I'm so pleased to be brought back to my home state, my alma mater, to talk about it. So the last few slides here are the advances across the different fields, and these are really the cultural fields that are changing on the landscape. So agency partnerships, education and scholarship, forest industry, and public perception. But first of all, we should accept that there are lots of fire starts in the east. These are all wildfires mapped by Charles LaFawn and others in 2017. And my son, who's in the audience, helped me put together this middle slide. We've had a lot of fires in the east across our landscapes, but look at the number of prescribed fires in red, pretty low until 2016. We finally massed and got all of our shit together, and now we're burning more acres out there than we're actually arsoning. Agency cultural change. Since 1910, the Forest Service has largely led the way in this area, but in the Mid-Atlantic during the 80s and 90s, most of the fire crews are trained by one or two little district staff here and there, and the Nature Conservancy. My hat's off to every Nature Conservancy person out here. It's your organization that has really pushed fire, as far as I'm concerned, in the East. Moving on to 2019. In 2001, Southern Illinois, we burned about 150 acres. This past year, we finally surpassed 20,000 acres, with many aerial ignitions exceeding 1,200 acres. The National Park Service at Gettysburg, they're now burning the round tops. Is that burn boss in the house? I want to meet you and shake your hand if you're here. No. That's unbelievable. The landscape has changed completely, and the interpretation and understanding of that battlefield is so much different now that we've changed that battlefield look. DNR here was doing crop release for wildlife management for rattlesnakes of all things, Crotalus horridus. We're no longer necessarily just pushing timber values, but wildlife values are very important now. Big cultural change. Anybody out there ready to burn Meeting of the Pines near Mount Alta? It needs it. My hat's off to the level and breadth of our collective scholarship. In 2001, Derlin Shumway, Mark Abrams, and I published a paper with 20 cut stumps and about 45 scars going back to the 1600s. Mike Stanbaugh and others publishing hundreds of fire scars now across central Pennsylvania. So we've moved on, and the level of our scholarship has developed. Education. When I was a grad student, there were about 150 to 200 fire papers out there that we could pull from, most of them telling us it was a dumb idea and wouldn't work. Since that GTR was published in 1993, this community has published well over 350,000 different manuscripts, research articles, reports, and brochures. Wave of fire across central Pennsylvania. You had that fire? Have you had that paper? Can I get an amen out there, Mike? That's the most wonderful work I've ever seen in my life. Well done, man. Excellent work. Mary Arthur, 2012, gave us filling in the gaps, revisiting the fire oak hypothesis, discerning where and when we should be applying fire on the landscape. And apparently my time is up, but others are still calling into question. Is it a good idea? Is it prudent? Have we gone too far? Is it too late to even put fire on the ground? In Illinois, we're only burning 6 to 9% of our burnable acres. If we're going to turn the corner on mesification, we really need to be doing much more. There's been a slow acceptance that very few fires or very few trees even get scarred on the landscape during a fire. Joe Marshall and others have showed the acceptable level of fire loss of value and grade. Prescribed fire councils are kicking up all over the state or all over the East. And for us, the national recognition that Stephen Pyne even knows fire is happening east of the Mississippi is absolutely wonderful, and it's an honor for all of us in this room as far as I'm concerned. And last but not least, our human population, the public acceptance, largely accept what we're doing. I still think it's a bunch of agency folks that are holding us up. The public is accepting of what we're doing. They've got caveats, of course. The growth of prescribed burn associations we'll hear a little bit more about from Jesse Riekman. Now 6 of those things exist east of the Mississippi. Got to have my hand off to Johnny and talking about redneck burners. This is a reading paper in my classes for my undergrads and grad students, and it's really all the valuable lessons that native redneck burners are teaching us about burning the landscape and what we need to be putting on the ground so that that legacy of native and Euro-American burning can live on with our students. Last but not least, public perception. The Chimney Tops fire in Gatlinburg 2016 showed the East that there is indeed a fuel flammability issue in the East and our forests will burn. It increased the need for mutual assistance and evacuation plans. And it's time for us to get our landscapes fire-wise in the East. One last slide here. When are we going to move from managing 7-acre lightning strikes to managing 7,000-acre watersheds as part of our wildland management out there in the landscape? We've got to get that Western mentality here. My good friend Morgan Barner, thank God that he's out there in the Northwest and teaching us about this stuff. So I appreciate that as well. And I've got a bunch of conclusions, but literally in the end, this conference must live on so that the upcoming generation of land managers has the full suite of knowledge, skills, and policy support to continue moving fire forward. And I know I'm out of time. So thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to meet more of you over the next couple of days. Field trips are going to be great. I used to teach labs at all these places talking about, boy, wouldn't it be great if we had fire on the ground? I can't wait to get out there and see those areas. So thanks for having me.